Hello, lovely people. Lucy and I are back from our break, and we're going to continue our conversation with some new topics we would like to talk about.
A mentor of mine used to always talk about wearing different hats, like just in daily life too. Like right now I'm wearing my artistic director hat, and now I'm wearing my dance teacher hat, and now I'm wearing my greet the world hat. Like this sort of, I need a certain amount of like, it's like a filter of framing for what you're doing. And if that could be helpful, just this mindset as like I'm stepping into a character, a persona. Persona is a word we use a lot for performance arts, like live art and performance. So it's the performer goes on stage and they're not doing theater in the sense of I'm playing a character and my character has lines and I have costumes and we're in this other world. It's very right here, right now, me using my body to do something in space, you know, that like very sort of modern art type of approach, but it's still a persona. That person doesn't think of themselves as their private self. It's their persona that they're projecting, and that can sometimes be a degree of, in the same way the mask, it isn't protection because you're not present. It's just something that like provides you something to fill.
Yeah. This is actually, yeah, on one hand, it can seem like it's contradicting the whole thing about peeling away and being vulnerable and authentic, but I don't see it that way. I'll tell you why. 2 summers ago, I read a couple of books on Jungian psychology, so Carl Jung. And one of the things he talks a lot about is personas and masks. And he's saying like we are all multiple personas and having multiple masks, and at different times we wear different ones. And the way I'm hearing what you're saying is by actively choose a persona, you're actively allowing that other part of you to get more acknowledged and presence in that moment. You need that personality and that persona. And it's a very natural thing. We do it all the time. You have a different persona when you're with your family versus when you're with your friend, versus when you're with your old friends versus when you're with your relative new friends, or with your boss and so on. So it's like constantly we have different personas, and they are as much true to you as the persona you wear most often. So there seems to be a big body of knowledge that supports that idea that this is also an authentic way of thinking about it, and maybe more realistic than thinking my true self is just this one little thing that has this feeling and is always that one. Anything else is fake.
Yeah, and if you think about like a child playing a witch, or playing Superman, or playing something, when that child does that, it's not fake. It's like adding on to what that authenticity, or like it's somehow just a different way of expressing themselves, but they're still very much themselves. That changes a little bit, you know, when we get older and we have more subtle skills. I think you really can, you know, separate yourself and play something else, and try and disconnect your internal, like your emotional connection and identification with what you're putting out there. And I think, yeah, it's a gray area of like, when is it manipulative or when is it fake? But if you're connecting and you're letting yourself flow through that character, or flow through that persona, then it's just like a filter, or an enhancement, or a channel maybe for it, that triggers other skills. Yeah, it's funny. It's hard to find the exact language that like communicates the whole idea. When I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking like, okay, we have the setup. I'm imagining the classes that I've seen you and Chris teach. And if you think about, okay, we have these 2 people here, and they're trying to communicate something to a camera. what is the persona, what is the character, what is the idea that you each can connect with the most, that brings you, that like helps you dial up the intensity of that authentic message that you're communicating.
Yeah.
So rather than, okay, now the camera's on, I'm gonna like, hey guys, la 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 la, you know, if that's your thing, then like it's probably gonna work for you and it's gonna be fun. But if it's you faking something because you think you should, we'll probably feel it. But if there's this way of like, okay, yeah, it's like what's the announcer Ali, what is his style? And if you like maybe try to play with things like that, you know, okay, try different characters as a way of exploring for yourself what brings more of you out.
Yeah.
So that could be almost like an off-camera practice thing with you and your partner, or you just by yourself. Like, I'm going to introduce this class today as the fairy godmother, you know, and I'm going to introduce this class today as like the grumpy old, you know, whatever, sitting on the porch having a cigarette. And I'm going to introduce today. And none of these you would end up using for your class, but each of those explorations, we do a lot of this in theater training. The extreme exploration helps you have different degrees of dial up and dial back. So, you know, your campy like announcer dude or my cheerleader, my clown that I bring out a lot in my classes, I dial up and dial back depending on how much energy I want to bring into the space, how much I'm trying to get out of my participants. If I'm feeling like, oh, the room's really dead, for better, for worse, like cheerleader Lucy is on, you know, 100%. And in other cases where I feel like, okay, everybody's on board, we need to focus, we need to work, she's dialed down, and maybe more of a drill sergeant comes out. But I know that the drill sergeant also has power and is effective for students that want to feel like they're really working. And so maybe some of those like different just labels, if it's a character label, if it's a hat label, if it's a persona label, whatever works for you. But just something that you can feel like, okay, I have a degree of, my physical theater teacher would always talk about like Spielraum between you and that character, or between you and that persona. You don't always have to be one. And it's still like, that's what I love about physical theater. There can be a lot of room between what you're performing and where you feel like you are just in your sort of personal self. But that's where the play happens. That's where the interaction happens.
It's interesting. You talk about Spielraum, like the range of characters you could go through. For example, to basically get the job done, or communicate more than just the words and like emotions around it. But there's also such a thing as dropping character. There's also such a thing of breaking the magic that you created. What would you say? How do you distinguish those two from each other? If you go between different characters based on what you need in that moment, like drill sergeant to cheerleader, for example, and how do you balance that with, for example, putting on the drill sergeant, but sort of dropping that character prematurely, or in a way where it starts making you just unnatural and authentic, so to say?
I think a lot of it connects back with the breath, and with groundedness. We talk a lot about groundedness in physical theater, like rooting down, feeling your body in space, connecting up, feeling your presence, and being connected inwards as well as outwards. So when you lose that connection in and down, I would imagine that it kind of flips and you lose control of it, and it's that fake thing. But if you're internally connected and you're playing with that outward. So there's this sort of like cycle, you know, of energy that's coming. I think that's when it works the best. And I'm not always successful at this, especially in situations in classrooms where I've felt like it's not going well and I don't feel totally secure. Maybe I feel unprepared or underprepared, or just I can't tell if everyone's having a good time or maybe somebody isn't, you know, and those insecurities that bubble up, I struggle with just as much. And when that cheerleader gets turned on out of insecurity and I like stop breathing and stop connecting down and stop like sending that from a place of playfulness and a place of connected and I don't want to say control because it sounds like, you know, marionettes or something, but like place of sort of souverän, you know, in German, like sovereignty over what you're putting out there, sort of like I own this. I think when I lose that and it's a desperate plea for something, then the cheerleader is very fake and it's not well received. And I've gotten that feedback before, you know, students that were frustrated by a well-intentioned trying to get everybody to feel good and be positive and here's the energy, and that was just received as like way too much. But I think when it comes more of just like, it is a part of who I am. It's very much a persona that is authentic, but it can be used inauthentically. And not everyone, I would never teach someone else like, hey, you should teach like this, because it would probably not work for them. But if you have that inner clown, or if you have that inner cheerleader, or you have the inner scientist, you know, like that's been your thing, I think, in a lot of ways. People love that. hearing how you break things down and how you analyze and how you can draw connections between things is a skill that you have that is different than my skills. And you can dial that up and really use it for something fun because it comes from an authentic place.
Yeah, those good old days where I was mixing chemistry and dancing in one thing. Here's something from organic chemistry that can teach us about dancing.
It's not a wrong technique, you know.
That can stay in the past.
Yeah, I mean, you may be laughing because it might have lost its connected, it's like, you know, useful groundedness, and maybe it flipped over into a sort of obsession or a need or a, you know, whatever. But in its essence, I think there's definite legitimacy there, and that's maybe this gray area that we're talking about is. How do you find that balance of like, here I am, me in space? One of the most basic exercises that we do for stage presence that is very challenging is getting up for 5 minutes and you just stand in space as neutral as possible, trying to clear your mind like you're meditating, and you just look at your audience.
Wow.
And that was just like a short second of doing that, and a ton of stuff comes up. It's amazing. Like the sort of, this is, you know, I'm really getting back to that delayering thing, you know.
One of the things I really enjoy doing is to MC at dance events, for example. And I was doing that for Chase Festival. So that year we had maybe 700 people in the audience. So a large space with many people. And I mean, it's live, it's jazz, it's swing, it's you want to have a certain feel to it. So there, like throughout the emceeing, I was trying to project a lot of energy, and you know, like this thing of, for example, where you talk at the tempo of the music. So if the tempo is like this, you're like, all right, ladies and gentlemen, here we have the band, and you know, you're like da, 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 at the tempo of the music, and it creates such a great feeling when you're doing that, because it's almost like a rap. And you're presenting this, you're creating this vibe and energy inside of the room just with the talking. And I remember like so many people coming up and like, oh, Ali, I've never seen you like that. I've never seen that side of you, because it's always often like this sort of soft.
Bear, Ali.
Yeah, maybe. And there was like this sort of like bam, like here I am, here I'm gonna talk. I don't want to say rap on stage, because you don't want to hear me sing or do anything like that. But it was definitely a persona. But it is one of my personas that I have. This is from my Persian upbringing of being a party clown, so to say. I just switched back to that one. And but because it's one of my personas, it's something I can hold for longer than 30 seconds as a joke, so to say. I can stay in that feeling throughout the whole weekend of emceeing, for example. I mean, when I go off stage, I don't do that when I'm talking to people, but like it switches on the moment you go onto the stage, and then you can switch it off, so to say. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes a little bit of that distance is helpful to invite you out to play. I'm trying to find a way to say that's like it's not a safety, it's not the masking that we were talking about of like, okay, I'm protected by this character because they can't see me, but in a way you are, because you're just not feeling like I'm putting out my most. Yeah, vulnerability is such an interesting thing to describe, because there's like the positive side of it and there's the negative side of the coin. You could put out your biggest insecurities and you could share, all the worst that you feel, and that would be being vulnerable. But there's also a type of vulnerability that's just being open, but maybe not like, I'm going to show you the worst side of the coin.
Sometimes one version of you don't get the job done. Like sometimes you don't want to be in touch with the afraid version of yourself. And it's a legit person in you. It's a legit person to soothe and comfort. But sometimes you just need to pass the baton to the tougher version of you. And again, this is, I mean, from how I have understood it, Jungian psychology is just that. And when you diverge from that, and when you are not paying attention to which persona you are talking from, you risk actually doing things and saying things that are in conflict with your main personas, for example, and make you feel like you just said something that is not true. You maybe said it because you're pleasing somebody else, and so on. And that's an internal conflict that you have between multiple personas, and you don't know how they interact. Okay, I'm digressing, I feel.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm digressing along with you because I find that fascinating. I've been thinking a lot about that lately, of that question of authenticity and how much is appropriate to share of what's really going on, and the sense of like one thing is true and everything else is not, but that's not the case, that all of these things are true, and it's like, which is the most helpful in that moment.
And something easy to practice, I would say. I mean, you would need to step out of your comfort zone, but you can, if one would, for example, think about their background and sort of different ways they've been interacting with people, inside of that, it's possible to discover what are natural personas to you, so to say, and then practice stepping into those shoes and putting on that hat, like you said, and step in front of the camera with this persona and see, is this something you can get used to? Is this something you enjoy doing? Will this persona create some magic online, which is what we're looking for, right? I think that's a great training and a great skill to have for online training, especially.
And helpful when we talked about watching yourself on video and that type of distancing a little bit to analyze what's going on, the labeling of, okay, maybe I've never thought about it before. I feel pretty natural when I teach and I feel confident about what I teach. Maybe you're not searching for like, how can I be more confident on camera? But
Right.
this act of looking at personas and character labels is like, well, what am I offering so far? And what range am I maybe ignoring that I might also be able to play with? So perhaps your confident teacher persona is what you want to label that. And then do you have a cheerleader, or do you have a drill sergeant, or do you have a, coach persona, or a sort of quiet, supporting, like, mother, father type? Like, all of these different energies could just be something fun to play around with and see what else you might be able to bring in that's really effective.
Yeah, that's a really good way of seeing it, I think. I even do it sometimes with my team, because on one hand, I'm their boss, but on the other hand, I'm also their friend. On the other hand, I'm also their dance partner. So, like, we have multiple roles, and sometimes we just need to clarify, like, would you like me to listen as a friend, or as a boss, or as a coach, or as a partner? Like, what is the role as well I have? So it can even extend into just being aware of this, and have this trained can allow you to be more flexible in how you engage with people around you, and in our case, our participants in our Zoom sessions, so to say, or online sessions.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing to look at. That's even another layer, not just what personas am I using and putting forth and what's helping me deliver, but what relationship. So who's the other character? And if you think about that in a theater context, we have a lot of options there as well. So
Right.
I'm this character now, and who are you? Because sometimes I find that in my classes, it's a lot more inspiring for me to think of my participants, regardless of their dance level, as my teammates, and we're all exploring this thing together, or we're all experimenting together. And so I like raise up, I change the status level of, like, I'm the teacher and you're my beginning kindergarten little
Right.
students, without being patronizing. But there are situations where you need to project a sense of, I know what's going on and I'll help you get through those first steps, because it's
Right.
intimidating. So you have that status level. But there's also other times that with the same level, you can approach and be like, hey, let's try it together, and have that attitude for yourself and towards them that's like, let's see. And both
Right.
of those can be effective. So that's an interesting sort of theater tie-in of, like, what relationship are you building up by the way that you're presenting?
I like that. All right, Lucy, thank you so much for bringing up this topic about personas and masks, and especially authenticity. I think it's a topic I really enjoy talking about, and hearing it from your perspective and your training as a performer has been very interesting and fascinating to me.
It's been a pleasure for me too, Ali. I love this topic, and it's something I think about constantly as a performer, but also personally, and can be used in so many different contexts. So it was really interesting and fun to explore that with you today. Thanks for having me.